You think country cooking was just tossing ingredients into a pot and hoping for the best? Think again. Mountain families developed ingenious techniques that turned scarcity into sustenance. Let's dig into 30 hillbilly cooking tricks only country families knew, and they worked. Burying potatoes in ash was one of the oldest cooking methods mountain families used before electric ovens existed in rural Appalachian communities. Fresh potatoes were nestled directly into warm ashes at the edge of a fireplace, covered completely until only coals surrounded them on all sides. The ash acted as insulation, slowly roasting potatoes over several hours until skins turned papery and insides became fluffy and sweet. Families learned exactly how deep to bury them through years of practice passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The technique required no pots, no pans, and no fuel beyond what was already heating the home. Children were sent to check potatoes by poking them with sticks, learning doneness through texture rather than timers. The finished potatoes emerged with subtle smokiness no modern oven could replicate. This method fed families through winters when other cooking options were limited and fuel was precious. Greasing cast iron with fatback was the secret behind every properly seasoned skillet in rural Appalachian kitchens across the mountain south. Fatback, the thick layer of fat from a hog's back, was rubbed across cast iron cookware while still warm, creating a protective coating that prevented rust and built the non-stick surface that made mountain cooking possible. Women saved every scrap specifically for this purpose, keeping pieces wrapped in cloth near the stove where they stayed soft and ready to use. The process was repeated after every use, building layers of seasoning that turned cheap cast iron into family heirlooms passed through generations. A well-seasoned skillet required no additional oil for frying and released food effortlessly. Children learned this ritual by watching mothers perform it hundreds of times before being trusted with precious cookware. This simple trick transformed basic equipment into tools that lasted lifetimes and cooked food with unmatched quality. Soaking beans with baking soda was a trick that solved two problems at once in mountain kitchens where fuel was precious and time was always scarce for busy families. A pinch of baking soda added to soaking water softened dried beans faster by breaking down their tough outer skins, reducing cooking time by hours. For families burning wood, they had chopped themselves. Shorter cooking times meant real savings in labor and resources. The alkaline water also neutralized compounds that caused digestive discomfort, making beans easier on stomachs. Women learned exact amounts through trial and error, knowing too much soda left a soapy taste while too little made no difference. The beans soaked overnight in crocks near the warm stove, absorbing water and releasing starches. By morning, they were plump and ready, cooking to creamy softness in half the usual time. This knowledge passed quietly between neighbors as practical wisdom that made survival easier. Cooking on the shovel blade was frontier ingenuity at its most practical when families lacked proper cookware or needed quick meals away from the kitchen hearth. A flat-bladed shovel, cleaned thoroughly and heated over open flames, became an instant griddle for frying eggs, toasting bread, or cooking small portions of meat. Field workers carried shovels anyway, making them dual-purpose tools that fed hungry workers during long days away from home. The metal heated evenly when held at the right angle over flames, and the long handle kept hands safe from the fire. Fathers showed sons how to judge temperature by watching metal change color and feeling heat radiating upward. Food cooked directly on the blade picked up a faint mineral taste that became associated with outdoor work and simple satisfaction. This technique required no additional equipment and worked anywhere a fire could be built, making it invaluable for remote work. Wrapping food in wet newspaper before burying it in coals was a technique that created steam cooking without any equipment at all beyond what most families had available. The dampened paper protected food from direct contact with ash, while moisture trapped inside created pressure that cooked fish and vegetables evenly throughout. Mountain families learned this from Native American traditions and adapted it to their own needs, using whatever paper was available from rare newspapers to catalog pages. The paper charred on the outside while food inside steamed to perfection, emerging clean and thoroughly cooked. Timing was crucial because too long meant paper burned through while too short left food underdone. Experienced cooks developed instinct for judging coals and thickness. The technique worked especially well for delicate fish that fell apart when fried, keeping flesh intact while infusing subtle smoke flavor. Children watched this magic happen at fish fries. Using vinegar to tenderize meat was how mountain families transformed tough cuts into something approaching luxury without spending money they did not have available. A few splashes of apple cider vinegar added to the marinade broke down tough muscle fibers in wild game and older livestock that would otherwise require hours of cooking. Families made their own vinegar from apple scraps, so the ingredient cost nothing beyond initial effort. The acid worked slowly overnight, penetrating deep into meat while adding subtle tanginess that complemented strong flavors of venison, squirrel, and tough old roosters. Women learned exact proportions through generations of practice, knowing how much was enough to tenderize without making meat mushy. The marinated meat could then be fried, roasted, or stewed with significantly shorter cooking times. This trick made poor cuts taste like quality and stretched limited protein into satisfying meals. Storing eggs in water glass was the preservation method that kept mountain families supplied through winter months when hens stopped laying entirely and eggs became scarce. Water glass, a solution of sodium silicate and water, sealed eggshells by filling their tiny pores and preventing air and bacteria from entering. Fresh eggs were carefully lowered into crocks filled with the solution, where they remained edible for 6 months or longer without refrigeration. Families gathered eggs during peak laying season and preserved dozens at a time, ensuring protein through lean months. The technique required clean eggs with intact shells, so women handled each one carefully, rejecting any with cracks that might introduce contamination. Eggs preserved this way cooked normally, though they sometimes produced flatter whites, which mattered little when food security was the priority. The crocks were stored in cool cellars where temperatures stayed stable. Making gravy from pan drippings was the technique that turned every meat dish into 2 meals and wasted nothing in kitchens where every calorie counted toward survival. After frying or roasting meat, the browned bits and rendered fat left in the pan became foundation for rich gravies that stretched protein into something more filling. Flour was sprinkled directly into hot fat and stirred constantly until it formed a paste that cooked to golden brown, developing deep, nutty flavors. Milk, water, or broth was added slowly while stirring to prevent lumps, creating smooth gravy that captured every bit of flavor from the original meat. Children learned to make gravy by standing beside mothers at the stove, learning exact motions and timing that defined good cooking. The gravy was poured over biscuits, potatoes, and cornbread, making small amounts of meat feed large families. Nothing was scraped into garbage when this knowledge lived in households. Drying apples on string lines was the preservation method that turned autumn abundance into winter sustenance without any special equipment or expensive supplies. Apple slices were threaded onto long strings using needles, then hung from rafters, porches, or any warm, dry spot where air could circulate freely around each piece. The process took days or weeks depending on humidity, with families checking constantly for signs of mold or insect damage. Properly dried apples shriveled into leathery rings that could be stored in cloth bags for months without spoiling. Come winter, these dried slices were rehydrated in water or cider and cooked into pies, cobblers, and fried pies that tasted of concentrated sweetness. Children helped with threading, learning patience and satisfaction of preparing for harder times. The strings became decorative as well as practical, hanging in kitchens where their sweet smell mixed with wood smoke. Smoking meat in the chimney was how mountain families preserved pork, game, and fish, using smoke from fires they were already burning for warmth and cooking. Hooks or racks installed inside chimneys held meat in the rising smoke stream, which dried and flavored the flesh while depositing preservative compounds that prevented spoilage. The technique required careful attention because too much heat cooked the meat while too little failed to preserve it, so families positioned racks at exactly the right height. Different woods produced different flavors, with hickory and apple being prized while pine was avoided for its resinous taste. The process took days or weeks depending on the size of cuts, with someone checking regularly to ensure even smoking. Meat preserved this way lasted through entire winters without refrigeration, providing essential protein. The chimney served double duty, heating the home while preparing food for storage throughout the winter months. Keeping butter cool in the well was the refrigeration method mountain families relied on before electricity reached rural hollows. A covered crock or bucket containing butter was lowered on a rope into the family well, where water temperature stayed constant around 50 degrees year-round regardless of summer heat above ground. The butter remained firm and fresh for weeks without turning rancid, protected by both the cool temperature and the darkness that prevented light from breaking down the fats. Families designated specific depths for different foods, knowing exactly where to position the rope for optimal cooling. Children were often tasked with lowering and raising the butter crock, learning responsibility through this daily chore. The technique required watertight containers and careful handling to prevent contamination of the drinking water below. This simple system provided what modern refrigerators do today, using nothing but the Earth's natural temperature regulation and a bit of rope. Using coffee grounds for scrubbing pots was how mountain women kept cast iron and heavy cookware clean without wasting precious soap. The coarse texture of spent grounds provided gentle abrasion that lifted stuck-on food and grease without scratching seasoned surfaces that had taken years to build. Women collected grounds after brewing, keeping them in a tin near the wash basin where they stayed slightly damp and ready for use. The natural oils in coffee also helped condition cast iron while cleaning, maintaining the protective layer that prevented rust. This method cost nothing since the grounds would otherwise be discarded, embodying the waste-nothing philosophy that defined mountain households. Children learned to scrub pots this way before being trusted with more delicate dishes. The faint coffee smell that lingered on clean cookware became associated with spotless kitchens. This trick worked so well that many families never purchased commercial scouring products. Saving bacon grease in tin cans was the foundation of mountain cooking economy, providing fat for frying, seasoning, and flavoring that cost nothing beyond the original bacon. Every time bacon was cooked, the rendered fat was carefully strained through cloth into cans kept beside the stove, building a supply that lasted between hog killings. The grease replaced expensive butter and lard for everyday cooking, adding smoky richness to everything from fried eggs to cornbread. Women knew exactly how much grease remained in their cans and rationed it carefully through lean months. The cans were never washed, building layers of seasoned flavor that improved with age and use. Children learned early that pouring grease down the drain was wasteful foolishness that would earn sharp correction. A full grease can represent security, proof that the family could cook proper meals regardless of cash on hand. This practice continued in mountain kitchens long after it disappeared from cities. Cooking cornbread on a hoe blade was field cooking born from necessity when workers needed hot food far from any kitchen. The broad, flat blade of a garden hoe, scrubbed clean and heated over an open fire, became a makeshift griddle that cooked cornmeal batter into crusty cakes. Workers mixed batter in the morning and carried it to fields in covered pails, cooking fresh bread during midday breaks when hunger demanded more than cold biscuits. The technique gave hoe cakes their name, connecting the food directly to the tool and labor that defined rural life. The metal heated unevenly, requiring skill to rotate the blade and prevent burning while ensuring the center cooked through. The finished cakes had crispy edges and tender centers, tasting of smoke and honest work. This cooking method represented the ingenuity of people who refused to go hungry simply because proper equipment was unavailable. Adding molasses to beans was the sweetening trick that transformed plain pinto beans into something approaching Boston baked beans without expensive ingredients. A generous pour of sorghum molasses or blackstrap stirred into the bean pot during the last hour of cooking added depth, color, and a subtle sweetness that balanced the earthy bean flavor. The molasses also helped thicken the pot liquor into a glossy sauce that clung to each bean. Mountain families grew their own sorghum cane and pressed it into syrup, making molasses an affordable sweetener when white sugar was luxury few could afford. The combination of beans, molasses, and salt pork became a complete meal that satisfied for hours and cost almost nothing to prepare. Children often preferred molasses beans to plain, making them easier to feed during lean times. This technique spread through Appalachian communities as families shared recipes at church gatherings and community events. Wrapping meat in corn husks before roasting was a preservation and cooking technique that kept moisture locked in while adding subtle sweetness to the finished dish. Fresh or dried corn husks were soaked until pliable, then wrapped tightly around seasoned cuts of pork, game, or poultry before being buried in coals or placed in Dutch ovens. The husks protected meat from direct heat while trapping steam inside, essentially creating a natural cooking pouch that basted the meat in its own juices. The corn imparted a faint sweetness that complemented pork especially well, creating flavor that seemed fancier than the simple method suggested. Families saved husks from corn season specifically for this purpose, drying them in bundles that hung from rafters until needed. The technique required no special equipment and produced consistently tender results. This method connected cooking to the harvest cycle, using every part of what the land provided. Making vinegar from apple scraps was household alchemy that turned peels, cores, and bruised fruit into a versatile ingredient that cost nothing to produce. Apple scraps were placed in crocks with water and a bit of sugar, then covered with cloth and left in warm spots where natural yeasts could work. Over weeks, the mixture fermented first into hard cider, then slowly transformed into sharp vinegar as bacteria converted alcohol to acid. Families maintained mother cultures passed down through generations, adding them to new batches to speed the process and ensure consistent results. The finished vinegar was used for pickling, preserving, tenderizing meat, and dozens of household cleaning tasks. Nothing was wasted when apple peels could become something so useful. Children learned to tend the vinegar crocks, checking for mold and stirring occasionally. This simple process provided a staple ingredient that store-bought families had to purchase. Burying cabbages for winter was the root cellar technique that kept this cruciferous vegetable fresh for months without any processing or canning. Whole heads were pulled from the garden with roots attached, then buried upside down in trenches lined with straw, with only the roots exposed above ground. The earth's stable temperature prevented freezing while the straw provided insulation and drainage. Families dug up heads as needed through winter, brushing off dirt to reveal crisp leaves that tasted nearly as fresh as harvest day. The technique required dry soil and good drainage to prevent rot, so placement was chosen carefully. This method stored vegetables using nothing but the ground itself, requiring no jars, salt, or special equipment. Children were sent to dig up cabbages for Sunday dinner, learning where each head was buried. This ancient preservation method kept families supplied with fresh vegetables through the coldest months. Cooking in clay pots buried in coals was slow roasting that required no attention once the pot was sealed and covered. Unglazed clay pots were filled with meat, vegetables, and liquid, then covered tightly and buried completely in the hot ashes of a dying fire. The clay absorbed and distributed heat evenly, while the tight seal trapped moisture inside, creating conditions similar to modern slow cookers. Families prepared these pots in the evening and left them buried overnight, waking to find tender stews ready for breakfast or midday meals. The technique freed women from tending fires constantly, allowing other work while dinner cooked itself. The clay imparted a subtle earthiness to foods that metal pots could not replicate. This method was especially valuable during harvest times when every available hand was needed in fields rather than kitchens. The pots themselves were often handmade from local clay. Using buttermilk to soak tough cuts was the tenderizing secret that transformed stringy wild game and older livestock into something approaching store-bought quality. The acid in buttermilk broke down tough muscle fibers, while the milk fats kept meat moist during cooking. Cuts were submerged in buttermilk overnight or longer, with the liquid penetrating deep into the flesh and neutralizing strong gamey flavors. Buttermilk was always available in households that kept dairy cows, making it a free tenderizer that cost nothing beyond the soaking time. The technique worked especially well on squirrel, rabbit, and venison that would otherwise require hours of stewing to become chewable. After soaking, meat was drained and cooked normally, emerging tender and mild enough for even picky children. This knowledge passed between generations as essential cooking wisdom that made the difference between enjoyable meals and tough, unpleasant chewing. Preserving pork in salt barrels was the method that kept families fed with meat through entire winters before refrigeration existed in rural communities. Fresh pork was cut into manageable pieces, rubbed thoroughly with coarse salt, and layered into wooden barrels with more salt packed between each layer. The salt drew moisture from the meat while creating conditions too hostile for bacteria to survive, essentially mummifying the pork in edible form. Families calculated exactly how much salt was needed based on barrel size and meat quantity, knowing too little meant spoilage while too much made meat inedible. The barrels were stored in cool cellars where temperatures stayed stable through winter months. Before cooking, pieces were soaked in fresh water to remove excess salt, a process that took hours or overnight depending on thickness. This ancient preservation method required significant salt investment but provided protein security that justified every penny spent on that precious mineral. Cooking eggs in ashes was the simplest breakfast technique mountain families used when pots and pans were unavailable or inconvenient for quick morning meals. Whole eggs in their shells were nestled into warm ashes at the edge of a fire, where gentle heat slowly cooked them through without any equipment at all. The shells protected the contents from ash while conducting heat evenly, producing eggs that were somewhere between soft and hard-boiled, depending on time and temperature. Families learned to judge doneness by touching the shells and feeling how hot they had become through years of morning practice. The technique worked especially well for feeding children who woke early while adults were still busy with morning chores around the homestead. Eggs cooked this way had a subtle smokiness that distinguished them from water-boiled versions. This method required nothing but a fire and patience, making it valuable for camping, traveling, and limited kitchen access. Making lye soap for cleaning pots was how mountain families produced their own degreaser from materials that cost nothing but labor and careful attention to detail. Hardwood ashes were collected and leached with water to create lye, which was then combined with rendered animal fat and cooked until it saponified into soap. The resulting brown soap was harsh, but incredibly effective at cutting through grease and burnt-on food that plain water could not touch. Families made large batches during spring cleaning, storing the soap in chunks that lasted through the entire year of cooking and scrubbing. The process required careful handling since lye was caustic and could burn skin, so children learned to respect the soap-making ritual from safe distances. This homemade soap cleaned cast iron and heavy cookware without stripping the seasoning that took years to build. The soap represented self-sufficiency, proving families could produce cleaning supplies from materials available freely. Drying herbs on rafters was the preservation method that kept mountain kitchens supplied with seasonings through winter months when gardens lay dormant under snow. Fresh herbs were gathered in bundles, tied with string, and hung upside down from kitchen rafters, where warm air rising from the stove circulated around them constantly throughout the day. The slow drying process preserved essential oils better than faster methods, maintaining flavors that would season months of meals to come. Families timed their harvest carefully, cutting herbs just before flowering when oil content peaked and fragrance was strongest. The hanging bundles became part of kitchen decoration, filling the room with wonderful fragrance while waiting to be crumbled into pots and dishes. Sage, thyme, mint, and dozens of other herbs hung in rows, each family's collection reflecting their garden and cooking preferences passed through generations. Children learned to identify herbs by smell long before they could read any labels. Using sorghum instead of sugar was how mountain families sweetened their cooking when white sugar was too expensive or simply unavailable at local stores. Sorghum syrup, pressed from cane grown in family fields and boiled down in community mills, provided sweetness that was richer and more complex than refined sugar could ever offer. The dark syrup was used in everything from coffee and cornbread to beans and glazes, becoming the default sweetener in households that could not afford store-bought alternatives that seemed like luxuries. Families often grew their own sorghum cane and participated in community pressing days where neighbors helped each other process the harvest into sweet syrup. The syrup stored well in crocks and jugs, lasting through winters without spoiling or crystallizing. Children grew up preferring sorghum's deep molasses-like flavor to the cleaner taste of white sugar. This homegrown sweetener represented true independence from stores and cash economy. Cooling milk in cold springs was natural refrigeration that kept dairy fresh through summer heat without ice or electricity that rural areas lacked for decades. Families positioned crocks and covered buckets in the flow of spring water that emerged from the ground at constant cool temperatures year-round, regardless of how hot the air became above. The moving water carried heat away from the containers while the shade of spring houses blocked direct sunlight that would warm the milk and cause rapid spoilage. Milk stored this way stayed sweet for days rather than hours, extending the time between milkings and reducing waste that families could not afford. Families built small structures over their springs specifically for food storage, creating cool rooms that served as natural refrigerators long before electric models existed. Children were often sent to fetch milk from the spring, learning the path and careful handling required. The springs became central to household food preservation efforts. Cooking squirrel in gravy was how mountain families transformed small game into meals that satisfied like much larger cuts of expensive meat from stores. Squirrels were cleaned, jointed, and browned in cast iron before being covered with milk or water thickened into rich gravy that stretched the protein across multiple servings for hungry families. The slow, simmering, tenderized meat that could otherwise be tough and chewy, while the gravy provided filling calories that made a few small animals feed an entire family comfortably. Young boys learned to hunt squirrels as their first game, bringing home contributions that mothers transformed into proper suppers everyone enjoyed. The gravy absorbed all the flavor from the browned meat and bones, becoming almost as important as the squirrel itself in the finished dish. Served over biscuits or rice, this dish demonstrated how hunting and cooking skills combined to provide sustenance when money was scarce. Making crackling bread from rendered fat was how mountain families incorporated every part of hog butchering into their cooking without wasting anything. Cracklings, the crispy bits left after rendering lard from pork fat, were folded into cornbread batter before baking, adding rich pork flavor and crunchy texture throughout every bite. The cracklings were saved during lard making and stored for use in bread, ensuring nothing from the precious hog was wasted or discarded. The finished bread had golden crusts and interiors studded with savory, crispy pork pieces that made plain cornbread seem boring by comparison to anyone who tasted both. Families often made cracklin' bread as a special treat following hog killing, when fresh cracklings were abundant and spirits were high from the successful harvest. Children fought over the corner pieces where cracklings concentrated and crust was thickest and crispiest. This bread represented the waste-nothing philosophy that defined mountain cooking traditions. Using dandelion roots for coffee was the substitute that kept mountain families caffeinated when store-bought coffee was too expensive to purchase regularly on limited budgets. Dandelion roots were dug from fields, scrubbed clean of dirt, roasted until dark brown, and ground into powder that brewed into a bitter beverage resembling coffee in color and warmth. The taste was earthier and lacked caffeine's stimulating kick, but the ritual of hot morning drinks was preserved regardless of cash on hand or store access. Families gathered roots in autumn when they were largest and most flavorful, roasting enough to last through long winter months ahead. The technique required patience during roasting since burning ruined the flavor, while under-roasting produced weak, grassy brew nobody enjoyed drinking. Children helped with digging and cleaning, while adults handled the roasting and grinding. This substitute represented independence from store-bought necessities that drained precious cash. Storing apples in straw-lined boxes was the preservation method that kept fruit fresh for months without any processing or special equipment beyond what farms already had. Apples were individually wrapped in newspaper or nestled in clean straw inside wooden boxes, then stored in cool cellars where temperatures stayed stable through winter regardless of weather outside. The wrapping prevented fruits from touching each other, so one rotting apple would not spread decay to its neighbors and ruin the entire stored supply. Families inspected their stored apples regularly, removing any showing signs of spoilage before damage could spread further. Certain apple varieties stored better than others, so experienced families grew keeping apples specifically for winter storage alongside eating varieties for immediate consumption during harvest. The boxes were positioned away from potatoes and onions, whose gases could accelerate ripening. This simple technique provided fresh fruit through months when nothing grew outside. Growing windowsill herbs year-round provided fresh seasoning that transformed bland budget meals into something restaurant kitchens would envy without spending a cent on expensive dried herbs from stores. Women kept small pots of parsley, chives, thyme, and green onions growing in sunny windows throughout winter, snipping what they needed and letting the plants regrow continuously. These fresh herbs added brightness and complexity to soups, stews, eggs, and beans that dried versions couldn't match. Starting herbs from seed cost almost nothing, and once established, the plants produced indefinitely with basic water and sunlight. Mountain families understood that flavor was the difference between food you tolerated and food you anticipated, and fresh herbs provided flavor without cost. Children learned to recognize these plants and help tend them, understanding from young ages that food could come from the windowsill as easily as the store. A few pots of herbs represented independence from grocery store prices and seasons. Drinking whole milk and eating full-fat dairy products was common practice before low-fat recommendations transformed the dairy case into a parade of skim and reduced-fat options. Parents were told that removing fat would make dairy healthier for growing children and weight-conscious adults. Decades of research now show that full-fat dairy consumers have lower rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease compared to those choosing reduced-fat alternatives. The natural fats in whole milk slow sugar absorption, provide fat-soluble vitamins in bioavailable forms, and signal satiety that prevents overeating. Removing fat concentrated the lactose sugar while eliminating the components that made dairy genuinely nourishing. Children raised on whole milk from the family cow or local dairy received complete nutrition that skim milk simply cannot provide. The fat phobia that transformed American dairy consumption may have contributed to the very health problems it claimed to prevent. Smoke preservation in small wooden smokehouses transformed fresh meat into shelf-stable protein lasting through seasons without refrigeration, using nothing but hardwood smoke and thyme. Food scientists understand that smoking deposits phenolic compounds, organic acids, and carbonyl compounds inhibiting bacterial growth while creating antioxidant protection. The slow, cold smoking techniques mountain families used, hanging hams and bacon for weeks in cool smoke, created preservation conditions that food safety research confirms prevent pathogen development. The specific woods chosen, hickory, apple, oak, each contributed different antimicrobial compounds families discovered through generations of experience. Researchers now document that properly smoked meats remain safe for months at temperatures that would quickly spoil fresh meat. The smokehouses standing in every farmyard represented food security technology refined over centuries. Commercial processors now replicate these techniques but cannot fully match them. Saving bacon grease in a jar by the stove was more than habit. It was economic survival that turned cooking byproduct into culinary gold worth more than its weight in store-bought shortening. Every strip of bacon rendered fat that was carefully strained through cheesecloth into a dedicated container, kept at room temperature for easy access during cooking. This grease-seasoned cast-iron skillets, fried eggs, flavored beans, greased biscuit pans, and added depth to any dish that needed richness. Mountain families understood that bacon grease carried concentrated pork flavor that expensive seasonings couldn't match. A jar might last weeks, providing free cooking fat that would otherwise cost precious grocery money. The practice was so universal that children assumed every kitchen had a grease jar until they visited city relatives who threw their drippings away. That small jar represented the difference between bland poverty food and meals that tasted like abundance. Home fermentation of vegetables was actively discouraged by food safety authorities during the 1960s, who warned families about botulism from homemade pickles and sauerkraut. Store-bought versions pasteurized with vinegar seemed safer and more reliable. Scientists now understand that traditional lactofermentation creates conditions where beneficial bacteria thrive while harmful pathogens cannot survive, producing probiotics that support immune function and digestive health in ways pasteurized products never can. The process preserved vegetables through winter while actually increasing their nutritional value, creating vitamins absent from fresh produce. Fermented foods populated the gut with diverse microorganisms now recognized as essential for mental health and weight regulation. Families who maintained crocks of fermenting cabbage weren't risking their health. They were cultivating living foods that modern probiotic supplements attempt to replicate at far greater expense. Lacto-fermentation in stoneware crocks was how mountain families preserved vegetables through long winters without refrigeration, using salt, water, and thyme to transform cabbage into sauerkraut and cucumbers into pickles. Scientists now understand this process cultivates beneficial bacteria, lactobacillus strains that modern probiotic supplements attempt to replicate. The fermentation creates lactic acid, preserving food naturally while producing vitamins and compounds supporting gut health. Research confirms that traditional fermented vegetables contain bacterial diversity commercial probiotics cannot match. Mountain families who ate sauerkraut with every winter meal, who drank pickle brine for stomach troubles, were practicing preventive medicine. The cool root cellars where crocks sat bubbling provided perfect fermentation temperatures that modern enthusiasts carefully monitor with thermometers. What seemed like primitive preservation was actually sophisticated biotechnology. Buying day-old bread from bakeries at half price or less was a weekly ritual that smart rural families never missed when trips to town allowed shopping opportunities. Bakeries and grocery stores marked down yesterday's loaves to clear shelf space, offering perfectly good bread at fractions of the original cost. Mountain wives arrived early, knowing the best selection went fast to families who understood this simple trick. The bread worked perfectly for toast, sandwiches, breadcrumbs, bread pudding, stuffing, and French toast, where freshness mattered less than price. Some families bought enough day-old bread to last the week, storing loaves in cool pantries or even freezing them when electricity reached the hollows. Children ate sandwiches made from bread that cost pennies per loaf, never tasting any difference from the expensive fresh version. This single habit could cut bread expenses by 60% or more, freeing money for protein and vegetables. Simmering bones for hours to make rich broth seemed wasteful to efficiency-minded 1960s homemakers being sold canned alternatives. Campbell's and other manufacturers promised convenience while dismissing homemade stock as unnecessary labor. Modern nutrition research has vindicated the old ways, revealing that bone broth delivers collagen, glycine, and minerals in bioavailable forms that support gut health, joint function, and skin elasticity. The gelatin released during long simmering creates protein structures that help heal intestinal lining damaged by processed foods. Glucosamine extracted naturally from cartilage provides joint support without expensive supplements. Grandmothers who refused to throw away chicken carcasses or beef bones weren't being cheap. They were practicing nutritional wisdom that pharmaceutical companies now bottle and sell for premium prices. The stockpot simmering on the back burner represented genuine wealth that no convenience product could replicate. Rendering lard at hog killing time was the process providing mountain families with cooking fat, skin moisturizer, soap ingredient, and medicinal base, all from portions modern processing discards. Scientists now recognize that properly rendered lard from pasture-raised pigs contains significant vitamin D, healthy monounsaturated fats similar to olive oil, and none of the trans fats in hydrogenated vegetable shortening. The rendering involved slowly cooking pork fat until it liquefied, then straining into crocks where it solidified into pure white cooking fat lasting months without refrigeration. Nutritionists who once condemned lard now acknowledge that traditional lard has a better fatty acid profile than many vegetable oils promoted as healthier. The cracklins left behind after rendering provided protein-rich snacks and additions to cornbread stretching precious resources. Mountain cooks who saved every scrap of fat were practicing waste reduction that modern sustainability advocates now champion. Making flour gravy to stretch meals was the secret weapon of every mountain grandmother who understood that a few tablespoons of flour and some drippings could turn a small portion into a feast. After frying meat, the cook would sprinkle flour into the hot grease, stirring until it browned before slowly adding milk or water to create thick, rich gravy. This gravy covered biscuits, potatoes, rice, or bread, transforming carbohydrates into something that tasted like a complete meal with protein richness. The technique required skill and practice to avoid lumps, but once mastered, it became instinctive. A single pork chop could feed a family of 6 when sliced thin and smothered in gravy over a mountain of biscuits. The gravy absorbed the meat flavor, spreading it across every bite of starch. Families called it making something from nothing, though really it was making everything from something small and treating nothing as expendable. Rendering and cooking with lard was standard practice in the 1960s kitchens before vegetable shortening and seed oils dominated grocery shelves. Health authorities warned families that animal fats would clog arteries, pushing them toward hydrogenated alternatives that seemed modern and clean. Decades later, scientists discovered those replacement products contained trans fats far more dangerous than anything in traditional lard. Pure lard from pastured pigs contains oleic acid, the same heart-healthy monounsaturated fat praised in olive oil, along with vitamin D that plant oils cannot provide. The smoke point proved higher than most vegetable oils, making it safer for high-heat frying without creating harmful compounds. Pie crusts made with lard achieved flakiness that shortening never matched. The generation that abandoned their grandmother's lard bucket for Crisco cans traded genuine nutrition for industrial convenience that science now regrets promoting. Root cellar food storage represented centuries of accumulated knowledge about temperature, humidity, and air circulation that modern scientists now study with sophisticated instruments. Mountain families dug into hillsides, creating naturally climate-controlled spaces, maintaining temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees year-round. These underground chambers kept potatoes from sprouting, apples from softening, and root vegetables from desiccating through entire winters. Food preservation researchers now understand that consistent cool temperatures and high humidity slow respiration and prevent ethylene damage causing deterioration. The layering techniques, storing apples away from potatoes, wrapping vegetables in newspaper, layering carrots in damp sand, reflected understanding of food chemistry textbooks would later confirm. Families maintaining these cool caverns stored enough produce to survive months of isolation. Modern homesteaders now build root cellars using these principles. Keeping a perpetual soup pot on the back of the wood stove was standard practice in mountain kitchens where nothing edible ever went to waste and every scrap found purpose. The pot stayed warm throughout the day, receiving vegetable trimmings, meat scraps, bones, leftover rice, pasta water, and anything else that still held nutrition. Each addition changed the flavor slightly, meaning no 2 bowls ever tasted exactly the same. Yet the soup remained consistently hearty and satisfying. Families ladled out portions for lunch or supper, then added water and new scraps to keep the cycle going for weeks at a time. The constant simmering extracted every vitamin and mineral from ingredients that would otherwise become garbage. This single pot could provide the base for countless meals, stretching resources beyond what seemed possible. Children grew up thinking soup was supposed to taste different every day, never realizing they were eating what modern folks might call kitchen waste, transformed into genuine nourishment. Saving and reusing bacon grease in ceramic crocks beside the stove was standard kitchen practice that modernization nearly eliminated. Food writers and health advocates condemned the habit as unsanitary and unhealthy, promoting spray oils and margarine as cleaner alternatives. Bacon fat contains roughly 40% saturated fat, but also 45% monounsaturated oleic acid, the same compound that gives olive oil its health halo. The rendered fat proved remarkably stable, resisting oxidation that makes polyunsaturated vegetable oils go rancid and potentially harmful. Using bacon grease for frying eggs, seasoning beans, or starting gravies added depth of flavor no industrial product could match. The practice eliminated waste, stretched food budgets, and delivered genuine taste that made simple meals memorable. Families who never threw away bacon drippings were practicing sustainable cooking that modern chefs now celebrate. Water glass egg preservation allowed families to store eggs for months without refrigeration, by submerging them in sodium silicate solution that sealed the porous shells completely. This technique, passed through generations of mountain women, kept eggs fresh from spring laying season through winter scarcity when hens stopped producing. Modern food scientists confirm that water glass creates an airtight barrier preventing bacterial contamination and moisture loss while maintaining quality for 6 months or longer. The eggs emerged from their mineral bath looking identical to fresh ones, with yolks standing high and whites holding firm. Commercial facilities now use similar principles, but the chemistry remains what farm wives discovered through necessity. Families practicing this technique never faced winter without eggs for baking or breakfast. The method required no refrigeration, no special equipment beyond a crock, and no ongoing attention. Foraging wild greens in spring provided free vegetables packed with vitamins that mountain families needed after long winters, surviving on stored food and preserved meats. Women and children walked fields and forest edges gathering dandelion greens, poke salad, lamb's quarters, and wild onions that grew abundantly without any cultivation or cost. These greens required knowledge to identify safely, but that knowledge passed through generations until gathering became instinctive. Properly prepared, wild greens tasted as good or better than store-bought vegetables, with deeper mineral complexity from growing in rich forest soil. Some families gathered enough to can or dry for later, extending free food into seasons when nothing grew. The practice connected people to land in ways grocery shopping never could, teaching children that food existed everywhere if you knew how to find it. Spring foraging trips became family traditions, mixing nutrition gathering with outdoor time and generational knowledge transfer. Heavy salting of meat for preservation was abandoned when refrigeration became universal, and health authorities began warning about sodium consumption. The practice seemed unnecessary when freezers could preserve food indefinitely without additives. Yet salt curing did far more than prevent spoilage. It created beneficial compounds, developed complex flavors, and improved the nutritional profile of preserved meats in ways freezing never could. The curing process encouraged beneficial bacteria while inhibiting pathogens, creating fermented products with probiotic potential. Salt-preserved meats developed concentrated flavors, requiring smaller portions to satisfy, potentially reducing overall consumption. Traditional hams and bacons prepared with proper salt curing contained enzymes and compounds that modern quick-cured versions lack entirely. The craft of salt preservation represented accumulated wisdom about food chemistry that industrial shortcuts eliminated while claiming improvement. Cast iron cooking was dismissed for decades as old-fashioned compared to modern non-stick surfaces, yet scientists now confirm what mountain cooks always knew. These heavy skillets delivered something essential beyond heat. Research proves that acidic foods cooked in cast iron absorb significant dietary iron, sometimes increasing iron content by 20 times or more. Appalachian women who simmered tomatoes, apples, and vinegar-based dishes in seasoned skillets were unknowingly treating iron deficiency anemia that plagued isolated communities. The pans themselves became supplements, leaching bioavailable iron into every pot of greens and every slow-simmered stew. Modern doctors now recommend cast iron cooking for pregnant women and children at risk of anemia. The seasoning process, coating pans with rendered lard and baking until glass smooth, created natural non-stick surfaces without synthetic chemicals researchers now question. Those heavy black skillets passed from mother to daughter carried more than recipes. Using chicken backs and necks for rich stock was how mountain families extracted maximum value from poultry that city folks considered barely worth buying at rock-bottom prices per pound. These bony cuts contained collagen, marrow, and meat scraps that simmered into deeply flavorful broth perfect for soups, gravies, rice dishes, and cooking beans. A pound of backs and necks cost a fraction of breast meat, but provided the foundation for multiple meals stretching across the week. Women would simmer the bones for hours with onion, celery scraps, and peppercorns until the broth turned golden and rich. After straining, they picked every shred of meat from the bones, nothing wasted, adding it back to soups or serving it over rice. This stock became the base liquid for cooking grains, making them taste like they'd been prepared with expensive ingredients. The practice taught families that the cheapest cuts often held the most potential for those patient enough to extract it. Adding generous amounts of butter or bacon fat to vegetables was considered nutritional sabotage during the low-fat obsession emerging in the 1960s. Health experts insisted vegetables should be steamed plain or eaten raw to maximize their benefits. Research now confirms that fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K require dietary fat for proper absorption, meaning naked vegetables deliver far less nutrition than those prepared with traditional fats. Carotenoids in carrots, lycopene in tomatoes, and other crucial compounds pass through the digestive system largely unutilized without accompanying fat. Grandmothers who fried green beans in bacon drippings or sautéed spinach in butter weren't ruining healthy food. They were dramatically increasing its nutritional availability. The practice also made vegetables palatable enough that children actually ate them willingly. Science now recommends exactly what common sense already knew. Some fat makes everything about vegetables work better. Nixtamalization was the ancient process of soaking dried corn in wood ash lye water that Appalachian families learned from Cherokee neighbors and practiced for generations. The process involved mixing hardwood ashes with water to create an alkaline solution, then soaking dried corn kernels until the tough outer hulls loosened and slipped away. What seemed like primitive folk cooking was actually sophisticated chemistry that modern nutritionists now celebrate. The lye treatment released niacin otherwise locked inside the corn, preventing pellagra, a devastating disease that plagued communities eating untreated cornmeal. The alkaline bath also increased calcium and improved protein quality by making amino acids more bioavailable. Mountain families who continued this practice never suffered the nutritional deficiencies striking populations eating refined corn. Scientists now study this exact process, calling it one of the most important food innovations in human history. Those grandmothers stirring ash water were performing biochemistry. Rendering lard from pork fat scraps provided free cooking fat superior to anything stores sold, while ensuring nothing from butchered hogs went unused in households where waste was considered sinful. When families butchered pigs or received fat trimmings from neighbors, the fat was cut into small pieces and slowly heated in large pots until it melted into clear liquid. This liquid was strained through cloth and cooled into pure white lard that stored for months without refrigeration when kept in cool places. The lard made flakier pie crusts than butter, crispier fried foods than vegetable oil, and spread on bread like the richest cream. Families who rendered their own lard never bought shortening from stores, saving significant money annually while producing superior results. The cracklins left after rendering became snacks or cornbread additions, meaning even the rendering process created bonus food. This self-sufficiency represented mountain values perfectly. Work hard, waste nothing, and produce results better than money could buy. Fermenting foods without commercial starters or precise temperature control seemed reckless to food scientists promoting standardized production during the 1960s. Wild fermentation relied on naturally occurring bacteria and yeasts that authorities viewed as unpredictable and dangerous. Traditional fermenters understood that proper salt concentration, anaerobic conditions, and patience created environments where beneficial organisms outcompeted harmful ones without external intervention. The resulting diversity of probiotic strains far exceeded anything commercial starters could provide, creating products with complex flavors and genuine health benefits. Sourdough bread made from wild-captured yeasts offered superior nutrition compared to commercial yeast versions. Naturally fermented pickles and sauerkraut contained living cultures that pasteurized products couldn't match. The wisdom embedded in traditional fermentation practices predated scientific understanding but achieved what laboratory methods later struggled to replicate. Haybox cooking was the ingenious method where mountain women would bring a pot to boil, then nestle it inside boxes stuffed with hay, quilts, or sawdust, and let residual heat finish cooking over hours without additional fuel. Scientists studying thermal retention now recognize this as remarkably efficient energy technology that modern slow cookers replicate with electricity. The insulation held temperatures in safe cooking range while allowing tough cuts and dried beans to tenderize slowly. Families who couldn't afford constant wood or coal used this method to produce stews, porridges, and braised meats requiring hours of cooking. Modern engineers study these principles for off-grid cooking solutions. The technique also prevented nutrient loss occurring with prolonged high-heat cooking, preserving vitamins that would otherwise break down. Contemporary chefs now use similar techniques under fancy names like passive cooking. Making buttermilk from regular milk stretched dairy budgets while providing essential ingredient for the fluffiest biscuits and most tender fried chicken that mountain cooking demanded. The process was simple: adding a tablespoon of vinegar or lemon juice to regular milk and letting it sit until thickened and slightly curdled, usually about 10 minutes. This homemade buttermilk worked perfectly in any recipe calling for the real thing at a fraction of the cost, since regular milk was always cheaper than cultured buttermilk. Families used this trick for pancakes, cornbread, cakes, and marinades, never needing to buy expensive specialty dairy products. The acid tenderized baked goods and meats alike, creating results that matched or exceeded recipes using store-bought buttermilk. Children watched mothers perform this kitchen alchemy, learning that substitutes often worked as well as the real thing when you understood the science behind cooking. This knowledge saved dollars monthly while losing nothing in quality. Eating liver, kidneys, and other organ meats weekly was routine in the 1960s households, before factory farming and supermarket convenience made such foods seem primitive. Muscle meats became the only acceptable protein while organs were relegated to pet food. Nutritional science now recognizes organ meats as the most nutrient-dense foods available, containing concentrated vitamins and minerals that muscle tissue cannot provide. Liver alone delivers more vitamin A, B12, folate, copper, and iron per ounce than any other food, supporting energy production and preventing deficiencies affecting millions today. Heart provides CoQ10 essential for cellular energy. Kidneys offer selenium and B vitamins in exceptional quantities. The generation that regularly consumed these foods experienced fewer deficiency-related health problems, despite having less access to supplements. What seemed like poverty eating was actually nutritional abundance that affluence foolishly abandoned. Bone broth simmering was the practice of cooking animal bones for hours or even days until the liquid turned rich, gelatinous, and deeply flavored with extracted nutrients. Scientists now confirm that this slow extraction releases collagen, gelatin, amino acids, and minerals, including calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, in forms the body readily absorbs. Mountain women who kept stock pots simmering on wood stoves, adding scraps and bones throughout the week, were creating liquid nutrition that modern wellness companies now sell for premium prices. The gelatin supports joint health and gut lining integrity, while the amino acids glycine and proline promote skin health and immune function. Nothing was wasted. Chicken feet, pig knuckles, beef marrow bones all contributed their particular richness to the pot. Families who drank bone broth daily, used it as cooking liquid, and served it to the sick were practicing evidence-based nutrition without knowing the science. Eating eggs daily was condemned by health authorities who believed dietary cholesterol directly caused heart disease. The American Heart Association warned families to limit eggs to 3 per week, treating them as dangerous indulgences rather than nutritional powerhouses. Modern research has completely reversed this position, finding no connection between egg consumption and cardiovascular risk in healthy individuals. The cholesterol in eggs actually helps the body produce hormones, build cell membranes, and synthesize vitamin D. Eggs provide complete protein with all essential amino acids, plus choline critical for brain function that most Americans lack. The yolks contain lutein and zeaxanthin that protect aging eyes from macular degeneration. Farm families who ate eggs daily from their backyard flocks weren't shortening their lives. They were consuming one of nature's most perfect foods. The decades of egg restriction may have contributed to widespread choline deficiency, now linked to liver disease and cognitive decline. Sorghum syrup production turned tall grass into sweetener when refined sugar was expensive or unavailable, providing calories, minerals, and flavor that sustained mountain communities. Nutritionists confirm that sorghum syrup contains iron, potassium, and antioxidants that refined sugar entirely lacks, making it nutritionally superior to the processed sweetener that replaced it. The process involved crushing stalks, collecting juice, and slowly cooking it over wood fires until it thickened into dark, richly flavored syrup. Scientists studying traditional sweeteners note that sorghum's complex flavor compounds reduce the quantity needed for sweetness compared to refined sugar. The crop itself grew in poor soil and dry conditions where other crops failed, providing reliable harvest when foods were scarce. Mountain families who drizzled sorghum over biscuits were consuming functional food before that term existed. Modern producers now market sorghum as artisanal sweetener. Drying beans and peas from the garden for winter storage meant families could grow their own protein that lasted indefinitely without refrigeration or expensive canning equipment. Women let bean pods dry on the vine until they rattled, then shelled them into cloth sacks hung in dry attics where air circulated freely. These dried legumes stored for years when kept away from moisture and pests, providing reliable protein regardless of grocery store access or prices. A single row of bean plants could produce pounds of dried beans, enough to feed a family through winter months. The varieties passed through generations, with each family maintaining seeds adapted to their specific soil and climate. Children helped with shelling, learning patience while contributing meaningfully to family survival. Dried beans cost nothing beyond seed and labor, representing the purest form of food independence that mountain families valued above almost everything else. Clabbered milk was the thick, tangy substance that formed when raw milk sat at room temperature until natural bacteria transformed it into something between yogurt and cheese. Scientists understand this spontaneous fermentation created probiotic-rich food containing beneficial bacteria that modern consumers pay premium prices to obtain. Mountain women who used clabbered milk in biscuits, cornbread, and batters were adding leavening, tenderness, and nutrition simultaneously. The lactic acid produced during clabbering created the acidic environment activating baking soda for rising, while fermentation partially digested lactose for those struggling with fresh milk. Food researchers confirm clabbered milk contained bacterial strains supporting digestive health and immune function. The process required no special equipment. Raw milk simply sat in a warm kitchen until it thickened naturally. Modern raw milk advocates now practice intentional clabbering, finally discovering what Appalachian grandmothers used for generations. Canning everything possible during harvest season transformed summer abundance into year-round food security that freed families from winter grocery dependence entirely. Women worked marathon sessions over boiling water bath canners and pressure cookers, putting up tomatoes, green beans, corn, pickles, jams, and anything else the garden produced. The investment in jars and lids paid dividends for decades as containers cycled through endless seasons of filling, eating, and refilling. A well-stocked cellar held hundreds of jars representing thousands of meals that required no additional grocery spending. Families counted their preserved food like savings accounts, knowing exactly how many weeks of eating lined those shelves. Children grew up understanding the connection between summer labor and winter security in ways that store-bought food could never teach. This practice meant grocery lists stayed short even when money ran shorter. Which hillbilly cooking trick would you try in your own kitchen? Drop your answer in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss another taste of forgotten country wisdom.